Welcome. In this video, we're going to discuss emotion and different theories of emotion. Two of the more popular theories of emotion are the James Lange theory and the Cannon-Bard theory. Both of them start with some sort of arousal from the environment. And here we see a snake, and then we have an emotional reaction. James Lange theory suggests that arousal leads to a physiological response, and that physiological response then tells us what emotion we're going to have, in this case, fear. Whereas the Cannon-Bard theory, we have that arousal from the snake, and at the same time, simultaneously, we have that emotion expressed and that physiological response. Now, another big name in the arena of emotion theories is Paul Ekman. So Paul Ekman spent a lot of time researching emotions in regards to facial expressions. And here you see 6 facial expressions. And basically, he proposed and did research that suggested that across all ethnicities, different countries, different languages, that we all identify the same facial expressions with specific emotions. There's also a 7th one that's added in that I didn't put here just because 6 fits much more nicely in the frame. But here we have fear, we have disgust, we have surprise, joy or happiness, sadness, and then up here I skipped over this one was anger. But you can see that there's some similarities between some of these expressions. And if you think about the physiological responses we have, there's also similarities between the emotions that we express in those physiological responses. So sometimes a turning stomach could mean that you're fearful, right? Or it could mean that you're surprised, or even sad perhaps, or disgusted. So a lot of the times those physiological responses don't necessarily match to one specific emotion. Well, Ekman proposed that the facial expressions did. So his idea was that these facial expressions cause us to experience emotions. However, his theory and his research was not without faults. So Lisa Feldman Barrett is another emotion researcher in the field of neuroscience. And so she started off her research career trying to build off of Ekman's theories and this idea that, okay, if these facial expressions cause us to experience our emotions, that if we can then measure people's facial expressions, we can predict what emotion that they are feeling at that time. And she did a lot of research looking at that, looking at physiological responses, and none of it kind of panned out. And so as a result, she, along with others, developed this idea of psychological constructivism or social constructivism that more closely aligns with the neuroscience of emotion. But the idea is that our emotions are constructed. They are made in the moment. And I'll have a video linked on the Canvas page for you to watch to get more detail. But just to explain it to you briefly here, we have our conceptual knowledge, our concept about what emotions are and what they contain. We have our core affect that we're feeling at that time, whether it's a pleasant or unpleasant feeling, or whether we have a low arousal or high arousal. And then we have information coming in from all of our senses. And we take all of this information and we then end up having a feeling, a behavior. We produce our facial muscles, we have vocal acoustics. And so it is creating the emotion. And the idea in her theory, which is really interesting, is it's a lot like when we talk about sensation and perception, is that those stimuli are hitting our sense organs, but then our brain is perceiving it, has to put that back together. Well, she kind of equates emotion in much the same way, in that we take our experiences that we've had, what we know about emotion at specific times and when we've experienced them in the past, and we take information about our environment that we're getting from all of our senses, and we take how are we feeling at the time, and we take all that information and we predict what the best emotion is to have. And sometimes it's correct and sometimes it isn't. And if you think about that, you don't always express the emotion properly that you want to express. And people who are higher in emotional intelligence, they're going to be able to express those emotions in a better manner, as well as identify emotions in other people more correctly. And so that's because all this conceptual knowledge that they have, if you have a high emotional intelligence, allows you to better predict the proper emotion for a given time. So I can't get through a discussion of emotion in a psychology class without bringing up the limbic system. Now, when I was back in graduate school, the neuroanatomist that taught us about the brain flat out said, there is no limbic system. He was not a believer in the idea of a limbic system and these different areas of the brain coming together to create our emotions, which is what is put forth in a lot of psychology books. Now, I'm not here to say that whether that is or is not the case. I am here to say that there is not one particular area of the brain that is responsible for a given emotion. We don't have an area for happiness and an area for sadness and an area for fear. That isn't the case. Whether it's all these areas working together, what neuroscience is probably going to show is that it's the interconnectivity between brain regions, again, that's showing or helping us construct these emotions, as Lisa Feldman Barrett suggests. But again, you're in a psychology class, so you should learn about what the limbic system is. And again, the idea is that it's a group of brain structures working together. And I'm only going to hold you responsible for knowing the basic brain structures. So the ones that kind of started off being discussed as a limbic system, and then many others have been added on. So if you remember the hippo in a hat, hopefully you can remember those brain regions. So the hippo stands for the hippocampus. Remember, that area is involved in memory and producing memories. And so as new information comes in, our hippocampus processes that and decides that it needs to store a new memory. That in itself is part of that construction of the emotion, right? Our memories are going to help us decide what emotion would be proper at that time. The hypothalamus is the H for the hat, and the hypothalamus, remember, sits just below the thalamus. It's involved in helping regulate a variety of different hormones, as well as those basic drives. The amygdala sits very close to the hippocampus, and lots of interconnectivity in between the amygdala and the hippocampus. We often think of the amygdala as processing fear, although it's probably just one of many areas that's involved in processing fear. We know that it is involved in fear conditioning for sure, possibly that emotional intelligence. And then the thalamus that sits here in the center of the brain, and remember, it gets all that incoming sensory information except for our sensation of smell, and then sends it to the appropriate cortical region. So it gets all that incoming sensory information to process, right? Because we need that sensory information, according to Barrett's theory, to help us predict, again, that based on what's going on in the environment, what's the best memory or what's the best emotion to have at that time.